The crystal glasses chimed, and a live trio murmured something elegant as 40 people lifted their forks in our honor, and I remember thinking the room smelled like butter and white flowers, and the kind of money you only borrow for one night. Adam stood to toast his tie, loosened his smile bright, our 10th anniversary, printed in looping gold on the menu beside everyone's plates. Someone down the table, one of his co-workers with more wine than sense, called out, "Tell her about the voice memo," and the air around me thinned, like the altitude had climbed 10 stories. The grin on Adam's face slumped for a breath and then snapped back. But I felt that stumble like a hand at the base of my neck. My phone buzzed in my clutch with a new message, a tiny orange icon I'd never noticed him use before. I slid the screen open and saw the words "voice memo" with a timestamp from earlier that afternoon, and in the hush of clinking forks, I heard only my own pulse. I lifted the phone thumb hovering over play and watched my sister's eyes flick to Adam, then to me. Then down the way, someone looks away from a storm they can't stop. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if stories like this help you find your own voice, tap like and subscribe so more women can hear what quiet strength sounds like when it finally speaks up. My name is Claire, 36, the daughter of 2 public school teachers who taught me to stretch $1 and keep my word. And I married Adam at 26 because he felt steady in a world that spun too fast. He was the kind who remembered the waiter's name and tipped like he had a future to prove, a man who made strangers feel seen and made me feel chosen. We started in a small Denver bungalow with bad plumbing and a maple tree that shed like it had secrets. I used a modest inheritance for the down payment because he said home equity was the safest place to grow a family. I worked in project management and believed in clean spreadsheets and honest deadlines, and he worked in sales and believed the right story could sell anything. When Ella came along, I scaled back to part-time, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself that a season of sacrifice is what makes the next season bloom. Brooke moved back to town the year Ella started kindergarten, not because she needed to, but because life had always opened a softer lane for her, the kind where people offer help before she asks. She volunteered to babysit, to swing by with dinner, to help me sort closets, because I kept saying I would get to them when the quarter calmed down. She liked being useful, and I liked feeling less alone. The 3 of us slipped into a rhythm that looked good from the sidewalk: my lists and Ella's art projects on the fridge, Adam's charm and high-five jokes, Brooke's easy laugh floating through our kitchen at odd hours. If there were fissures, they were hairline, his phone flipping face down when I walked in the new gym routine that didn't match his calendar, Brooke leaning too close during a story, and Adam not stepping back. I brushed them away like lint because that's what you do with love. You keep it tidy and tell yourself not every shadow is a threat. Money talk changed first, softly at the edges. Adam started saying my bonus and my team, and I started saying our mortgage and Ella's tuition, and the math between those phrases didn't add up the way it used to. He had a short-lived business idea that I funded from what was left of my inheritance, a bridge he called it, and I told myself, bridges take people somewhere better. When it failed, he swallowed the story whole and moved on without the kind of apology that sounds like repayment, and I called it a lesson because that word feels practical.
At night, I'd lie awake running budgets in my head like prayer beads. Utilities, soccer fees, the tires that
Needed replacing, while Adam scrolled with the blue light, washing his face, saying he was too tired to talk numbers. On better days, I believed him. The anniversary party had been my idea, something simple that became grand, because people offered, and Adam accepted, and it felt ungrateful to say no to celebration. The restaurant tucked us into a private room with a door that slid shut on velvet rails. The napkins were heavy, the kind that make you sit up straighter. My parents were there, proud and oblivious, and Brooke showed up in a pale dress that matched the lilies hugging me a beat too long, like she could memorize my warmth. When Adam toasted me, the heart of our family, His words, his voice easy and smooth. Everyone clapped, and I lifted my glass, because you clap when people praise you, even if your skin feels a size too small. Then that coworker's joke slipped across the table like oil, and the room tilted just enough to make the edges blur. I tell myself now that the body knows before the mind will listen. Shoulders rise, breath shortens, fingers go cold, and still, you smile because the polite thing is easier than the true thing. In that moment, it was the sound before anything else, the trio pausing chairs whispering against the floor forks stilled in midair while my phone vibrated again and settled against the leather of my clutch like it belonged there. Adam tried to catch my eye the way a man does when he still believes he can manage the timing. And Brooke looked everywhere except at me, studying the grain of the table like it could read her a better story. I thought of the maple tree in our yard and how its roots ran under the fence into the neighbor's lawn, invisible and relentless, and I understood there are things that look sturdy until the ground beneath them shifts. I took a breath, felt the wood of the chair press between my shoulder blades, and pressed my thumb against the screen. The voice that came next would decide the rest of my life, and I had no idea who in that room would still be standing when the door slid shut behind me. The moment my thumb touched the screen, the room seemed to collapse inward, every sound muffled except for Adam's voice pouring from the small speaker. "Brooke last night was incredible," he said, casual and certain like the words belonged to a private world that wasn't mine. Laughter from him low and easy, then her voice answering back, sultry and sharp. "She has no clue, Adam. It's almost pathetic." The gasp that rolled across the table was louder than the music had been all evening. And in that silence, I felt my own body steady instead of break. Adam lunged across the table, hissing for me to stop, but I pushed back my chair and stood holding the phone high so no one could claim misunderstanding. "You've been sleeping with my sister," I said. And though my throat burned, my voice did not shake. His coworkers froze their faces pale under the amber light. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, while my father's jaw clenched so hard I thought the bone might splinter. Brooke sat stiff, her hand gripping the stem of her glass, until her knuckles whitened, unable to meet my eyes. The weight of betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was there, breathing across linen and candlelight. He tried to control the story, even then stammering. "It's not what it sounds like," but I cut him off before the lie could root. "It sounds like my husband can't wait to sneak around with my sister while I plan his celebrations," I said, sharp and deliberate. Phones appeared in quiet hands, screens tilted at discreet angles. Whispers carried from one end of the table to the other like a draft through cracked windows. Adam's mask slipped, panic crawling across his expression. And when he reached for my arm, I pulled away so quickly, his hand sliced only air. "Don't touch me." I snapped my words, cracking like a whip in the silence. For a beat, no one moved. Then something in me, cold and clean, rose to the surface. I lifted my hand and struck him across the face. The sound echoed, startling in its clarity, and I watched his head snap to the side, his palm flying to his cheek as if he couldn't believe I dared. The crowd gasped again, but I felt nothing except the strange calm that comes with certainty. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "You've given me the only gift I'll ever remember from this anniversary proof." And with that, I gathered my clutch, lifted my chin, and walked out to the steady rhythm of my heels against marble. The night air was cold, the kind that clears the haze from your lungs, and I let it fill me as I stepped outside. Behind me, voices rose, Adam's sharp and pleading, Brooke's faint, the scraping of chairs and the hum of scandal beginning its orbit. But it no longer mattered. I had proof, and I had made my vow. He thought I would crumble in silence. Instead, I walked into the darkness sharper than I had ever been. Later that night, after the house fell quiet, and Ella's small breaths rose steady from her room, I sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hand curled around the worn rabbit she never slept without. 8 years old enough to sense tension, too young to name it. I smoothed her hair and whispered to the air, promising her that she would never learn endurance as weakness, never mistake silence for strength. She shifted in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't catch, and the innocence of it cut deeper than any words Adam or Brooke had spoken. Whatever storm waited, I would face it so she wouldn't have to. The next morning, while coffee turned bitter on my tongue, Ella padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. She asked almost casually, "Mommy, why was Daddy whispering with Aunt Brooke in the garage last week? He told me not to tell you." Her words landed with the weight of a hammer driving the final nail. I froze, mug suspended halfway to my lips, then set it down before it cracked in my hand. My daughter's honesty had stripped away the last shred of excuse I might have given them. Adam hadn't only betrayed me, he had pulled Ella into his lies, teaching her to hide secrets, to carry burdens that weren't hers to bear. I knelt, kissed the top of her head, and held her longer than she understood. I didn't tell her my decision out loud, but in that moment, something inside me hardened beyond repair. Shock had carried me through the dinner grief through the night. But as the sun rose again, I felt a different pulse, a clarity that didn't shake. I wasn't a humiliated wife grasping for scraps of dignity. I was a mother who had drawn her line, a woman who had given enough years to sacrifice. Adam thought I was the safe choice, the one who would forgive and cover his sins in silence. He had no idea what he had awakened. That day, I began with the simplest move: money. Always start where power hides. I logged into every account, checking savings, credit cards, the small investment fund, and shifted half into a new account with only my name. I called the bank voice steady and froze the rest. The inheritance I had poured into our house and finances was not going to bankroll his betrayal. By the time Adam returned from work, grinning like he still believed I was broken, the accounts were already locked. He hadn't noticed yet, and that was to my advantage. That evening, I searched for names until I found the one a colleague had whispered about months earlier, a divorce attorney with a reputation sharp enough to cut glass. Her voice on the phone was calm, efficient, impossible to intimidate. "Bring everything," she instructed. "Documents, recordings, texts, anything you can gather." I promised her I would. For the first time since the recording played in that restaurant, I felt something close to relief. I wasn't helpless. I was building my own case, brick by brick. In the basement, I spread papers across the old folding table, mortgage files, tax returns, insurance, every slip of paper tied to our lives. My hands shook not from sorrow, but from clarity. Each page, another nail in Adam's coffin. I realized I had been the one stitching our life together, while he unraveled it in secret. That knowledge stung, but it also steadied me. The house, the car, Ella's school forms, everything bore my handwriting, my planning, my sacrifice. I wouldn't let him take one more piece. On the third day, I called a realtor I trusted and asked for a private valuation of our home. Not to sell, not yet, but to arm myself with numbers before Adam realized what was shifting beneath him. That same afternoon, I filed Ella's paperwork to list me as primary guardian at her school. Small steps, quiet steps, each one stacking power in my corner. Adam carried on as if nothing had changed, spinning lies for his coworkers, making jokes loud enough to drown whispers while I moved in silence. He thought my stillness was surrender. It was strategy. It didn't take long for him to notice. One evening, he stormed into the kitchen, waving his phone, fury splashing across his face. "Why is the card declined? Did you forget to pay the bill?" he demanded. I met his eyes calmly. "No," I said. I froze the account. His jaw dropped, the blood draining from his face. "You what? My money! My inheritance, our credit. It will not fund your affair with my sister, I replied, my voice sharp as glass. If you want to impress Brooke, you'll need to find another way. For the first time, real panic flickered in his eyes. The ground beneath him was shifting, and he realized I was the one moving it. He tried to lower his tone, tried to coax. Claire, let's talk. You're overreacting. We can fix this. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the words were so predictable, so empty. You recorded your confession, Adam. There is no fixing. There's only fallout. He muttered something under his breath and backed away, but the damage was done. I had seen the fear in his eyes, and I knew he finally understood I wasn't playing the role of the devastated wife. I was building the wall, and he was already on the outside. That night, I tucked Ella into bed, smoothed the blanket across her chest, and kissed her forehead. Mommy's got this, I whispered too softly for her to stir. Upstairs, in the quiet of my own room, I felt the steel rising in me, where softness used to live. Adam thought shadows would protect him, but I was done hiding. Every step I took would be deliberate, visible, unstoppable, and the best part was he hadn't even seen what I was capable of yet. When Adam stormed out of the kitchen that night, muttering under his breath about how cruel I was, the silence he left behind felt heavier than his anger. I sat at the table staring at the glass of water in front of me, untouched, watching condensation slide down its side like a clock ticking. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage where every memory had been poisoned by what I knew now. Even the framed family photos on the walls seemed to mock me. Adam smiling with his arm around me. Brooke standing close at Christmas gatherings. All of it, a portrait of a life that never truly existed. I barely slept, drifting between shallow dreams and the sound of Adam pacing in the guest room. By morning, my head throbbed, but the resolve inside me was steady. I dressed for work, packed Ella's lunch, and moved through the motions as if everything were normal. But inside, I felt stripped raw. When I dropped Ella off at school, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Don't worry, Mommy." Her words almost undid me, but I smiled back, kissed her forehead, and promised myself again that she would never be taught to accept betrayal as normal. That afternoon, I met with Helen Ruiz, the attorney I'd spoken to on the phone. Her office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, and the diplomas on the wall reminded me I wasn't walking into another gamble, I was walking into certainty. She shook my hand firmly, her eyes sharp, but not unkind. "Claire, I've read your notes. What we need is evidence, consistency, and a clear financial trail. Do you have access to everything?" I nodded, sliding the folder across the desk with shaking hands. Inside were the voice memo screenshots of texts and financial statements I'd gathered. She flipped through them quickly, her face unreadable until she looked up. "This is strong, very strong. He'll try to deny, but you have his words. That makes it almost impossible for him to twist." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without feeling guilt catch in my throat. The strength I borrowed from her carried me back home, where Adam had shifted into a strange rhythm of desperation. He circled me in the kitchen like a man rehearsing an apology he couldn't quite deliver. He said, "Claire, people make mistakes. We can move past this." I stood at the counter slicing apples for Ella's snack, the knife steady, my voice quiet. "A mistake is forgetting a birthday, Adam. You built a second life with my sister. That isn't a mistake. That's a choice." His face fell, but I didn't waver. He stormed out again, slamming the back door, and I let the silence fall without chasing after him. Whispers had already begun their slow crawl through our circles. At church the following Sunday, a woman I barely knew avoided my eye in the foyer. as though my private life was something contagious. Another leaned in too eagerly to ask if I was all right, her tone dripping with curiosity more than concern. I held Ella's hand tightly, keeping my posture tall as we walked past. The voice memo had leaked beyond the dinner table, and though I hadn't pushed it further yet, people were already carrying the story for me. Denver wasn't small enough for secrecy anymore. Brooke tried reaching out by text that week. Messages blinked on my phone at odd hours. "I'm sorry, Claire. Please let me explain." Then another. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I stared at the words until my chest felt tight, then powered the phone down. There was nothing left for her to explain that wouldn't twist the knife deeper. She had smiled at me in my own kitchen while sneaking into the shadows with my husband. That betrayal cut in a place I didn't have words for. Ignoring her wasn't forgiveness, but it was survival. The nights were the hardest. When Ella went to bed, the house fell quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak in the walls. Adam still tried calling from the guest room, his voice low behind the door, rehearsing apologies that never made it past the threshold. Sometimes I caught him staring at me in the morning, his eyes hollow, as if he was waiting for me to relent. But I didn't. I couldn't. Every time I felt doubt creep in, I remembered Ella's innocent question about the garage, her trust in me, and my mother's face at the dinner when she heard Brooke's voice. Those memories turned any softness to stone. One night, when Adam's temper broke through the silence, he cornered me in the kitchen with his voice sharp. "You're ruining me. Do you understand that?" His hand slammed against the wall, the sound echoing up the staircase. I looked him dead in the eye and said evenly, "You ruined yourself the moment you pressed record. All I'm doing is showing the world who you are." For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face that wasn't anger. It was fear. He stepped back, his hands trembling, and retreated without another word. Upstairs, I checked on Ella, who had stirred at the noise, and reassured her with a calm I didn't feel until I saw her drift back to sleep. By the end of that week, Adam's facade outside the house began to unravel. A friend texted me a screenshot from a neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had posted about hearing the recording at dinner, and comments piled up beneath it, sympathy for me, ridicule for him, and disgust at Brooke's name being attached. I didn't type a word, but I read every line with a steadying calm. The world was beginning to see what I already knew. Even Adam's family started to fracture. His brother Daniel, who had always been distant but polite, stopped returning his calls. His father, once quick to defend him, sent me a private message that simply read, "Whatever you need, Claire, you have my support." That meant more than I could admit. For once, the disapproval wasn't mine to carry. It was his. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. Every quiet step I had taken, freezing accounts, hiring Helen, gathering evidence, was just laying the foundation. The storm had barely started, and Adam was already unraveling. Watching him scramble between anger and pleading, between arrogance and desperation, showed me what he really was without his mask. He was a man who had built his life on lies, and now those lies were collapsing around him. All I had to do was keep steady and let the cracks widen. That night, after putting Ella to bed, I stood in the kitchen staring out the window at the darkened street. My reflection in the glass looked different, somehow harder, but calmer, like a woman I was just beginning to recognize. I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." And I meant it. The night after Adam pounded the wall in anger, I sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out like puzzle pieces. bank statements, text transcripts, mortgage contracts, all the things I had collected, each one proving that my years of sacrifice had built the life he tried to throw away. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, but my mind was louder than any storm. This wasn't grief anymore. It was strategy. Every page I touched reminded me that the house, the finances, the parenting, it had always been me. And now it was going to be me who turned that truth into leverage. The following morning, Adam walked into the kitchen, acting as though nothing had happened. He poured himself coffee, whistling under his breath the same tune he used when trying to project control. I didn't look up from the documents I was reviewing. When he sat across from me and said, "We don't have to make this ugly, Claire. We can fix it." I felt the steadiness in me harden further. "There's no fixing this," I told him. "There's only the truth, and the truth is already spreading." His hand tightened around the mug, but he didn't speak. He knew it was true. He could see it in my face. The rumors weren't rumors anymore. They were stories passed like wildfire. Derek, his co-worker, had let the voice memo slip at dinner, and now their entire office had pieced it together. When Adam walked into work, colleagues no longer greeted him with easy camaraderie. Whispers followed instead. He tried to carry himself with the same confidence, but charm can't erase proof. Screenshots circulated, and the texts between him and Brooke became fodder for gossip threads. He wasn't the confident salesman anymore. He was entertainment, and not the flattering kind. At home, the divide stretched wider. Brooke's calls began to flood in her number, flashing on my phone with increasing desperation. I never answered. The messages grew from apologies to half-hearted explanations. It wasn't serious. It's not what you think. "I still love you, Claire." Each word made me sick, not because they hurt, but because they revealed just how little she understood the damage. She had stolen from me in a way no stranger ever could. Silence was the only reply she would get from me. Even my parents, who had always tried to keep peace, took a firm side. My mother called one evening, her voice quiet but sharp. "She is not welcome in my home," she said. "Brooke has made her bed, and now she can lie in it." I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me. For once, it wasn't me being measured against Brooke's charm or excuses. For once, it was her carrying the weight of disappointment. One afternoon, Ella came home from school with her cheeks flushed. She dropped her backpack and whispered, "Mom, kids were saying Daddy's in trouble. Is it true?" I knelt down, so we were eye to eye, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Daddy made choices that hurt us," I told her gently. "But you and I are safe. That's all that matters." She nodded slowly, still too young to grasp betrayal, but old enough to sense the shift. I hugged her longer than usual, holding on to the reminder of why I couldn't falter. Adam's temper and desperation came in waves. One evening, he cornered me again, his voice low and filled with venom. "You're turning everyone against me." "Do you even care what this is doing to our family?" I leaned back against the counter, meeting his glare without flinching. "You did this to yourself," I said evenly. "I'm not turning people against you. They're just finally seeing the truth." His hands shook, and for a moment I thought he might strike the wall again. But when I refused to step back, he froze, then stormed out of the room. The balance had shifted, and he knew it. Within days, his desperation spilled into public. He called me from the driveway from the office, from unknown numbers, always with the same plea. "We can work this out. Don't do this." But every call I ignored was another thread cut from the net he had relied on to keep me bound. He even pulled up once while I walked Ella home from school, lowering the window of his car and forcing a smile. Claire, 5 minutes. Just talk to me. I stopped Ella's small hand, gripping mine tightly, and looked him in the eye. Not here, not now. Not ever, I told him, my voice loud enough for nearby parents to hear. His smile faltered as the weight of witnesses pressed in and he drove off without another word. That was the moment I knew fear no longer held me. The shame was his alone to carry. Word of the scandal reached beyond our neighborhood. Invitations that used to pour in for Adam dried up. Mutual friends stopped returning his calls. At church, no one asked him to serve on committees anymore. Even his own brother blocked his number, tired of the excuses. He was unraveling faster than I had anticipated, and I hadn't yet lifted more than a finger. All I had done was stop shielding him, stop covering the mess he created. The rest was him collapsing under his own weight. Then came the call from his mother. Her voice shook when she asked me to join them for dinner as a family. "It's time for healing," she said, the word catching in her throat. I almost laughed at the thought of healing when the wound was still raw and bleeding, but I agreed to go. Not for Adam. Not for Brooke. I went because silence had protected them long enough. If they wanted to hear the truth, I was ready to lay it out. The restaurant they chose was Old Denver Money. Dark wood walls, white tablecloths, chandeliers glinting softly above. When I walked in dressed in black with no jewelry and no smile, every eye at the table turned. Adam sat stiffly between his parents, Brooke across from him with her hair sleek and her expression carefully arranged. His brother sat at the far end, arms crossed, lips tight. Adam began as I approached Claire. "Thank you for coming. I know we've had misunderstandings." His words were rehearsed, polished, but hollow. I cut him off with a laugh that held no humor. "Is that what we're calling it now? Misunderstandings?" The table stiffened, forks stilled, and for a moment no one spoke. Then I placed my phone on the table and slid it across to his father. "You all want to believe this was a mistake. One night, a moment of weakness. Fine, read for yourselves." His father picked it up, scrolling through the texts I had saved. Not one message, not one night. Months of conversations. Plans made behind my back. Mockery of me while I worked late or attended Ella's school events. His father's face darkened, and his brother shoved back his chair, muttering, "You sick bastard." Brooke's composure cracked, tears springing but unshed. "Claire, please," she began, but I snapped my gaze to her. "Don't you dare speak to me. You betrayed me in my own home while my daughter slept upstairs. You don't get forgiveness. You don't even get words." Adam tried to grab the phone, but his father smacked his hand away. "You've disgraced this family," the older man said, his voice trembling with fury. Adam sat there, cornered, stripped of his performance. For once, there was no charm to reach for, no script to hide behind. I stood slowly, letting the chair legs scrape the floor. The restaurant had gone quiet, neighboring tables turning toward us. "You wanted healing?" I said, my voice calm but carrying. "Here it is, the truth, raw and ugly. His alone to carry." Adam's face flushed red, blotches spreading up his neck, and he hissed at me, "Stop making a scene." I leaned closer, just enough for him to hear the weight in my words. "A scene. This is the scene you created. I'm just setting the stage." I straightened my eyes, sweeping across the room. He didn't just cheat on me. He auditioned for the role of coward, and he nailed it. The silence broke into low chuckles, then muffled laughter spreading through the restaurant. Brooke bolted from the table, her heels clattering against the floor, her retreat loud and graceless. Adam's parents looked away in shame, his brother shaking his head. And I picked up my bag, steady and unhurried. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "I'm done wasting my appetite here." I walked out to the sound of laughter behind me, the rhythm of my heels against the floor echoing in my chest. Outside, the night air was sharp and cool, and my phone buzzed in my bag. Messages already poured in, friends, acquaintances, even strangers who had been in the restaurant. Adam always loved an audience. Now he had one, but this time they weren't applauding. After that dinner with Adam's family, when I walked out to the sound of strangers laughing at his expense, I knew something in the balance had shifted. He wasn't just a man with a private scandal anymore. He was a spectacle, and once the public caught the scent of humiliation, it spread like smoke. For years, he had thrived on being admired, on controlling how people saw him. Now I had ripped that mask off in front of an audience, and there was no slipping it back on. Within days, I saw how fast the cracks spread. Someone had recorded my line from the restaurant, and it began making the rounds online. It wasn't planned, I hadn't needed to lift a finger. But suddenly, Adam's own words were being replayed alongside mine. Friends sent me screenshots of group threads filled with disbelief, coworkers whispering about the coward neighbors sharing knowing looks. What he once built with charm was now collapsing under laughter. The man who used to stride into a room and draw attention now walked hunched, sunglasses on, avoiding eye contact even at the grocery store. His reputation was slipping beyond his control, and for him, that was worse than losing money. He tried to fight it with the only tools he had left: spin and performance. A local magazine ran a piece after he pitched them a story about being misunderstood, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive wife and family drama. The photo showed him in a staged pose, tie loosened, chin dipped just enough to look wounded. When I saw it, I felt no anger, only a calm certainty. Lies are brittle. All it takes is one crack and they crumble. That crack came sooner than even I expected. An old colleague of his sent me screenshots of private messages between him and Brooke that had been floating around the office. They weren't just careless, they were cruel. Mocking me for being too tired to notice, making plans while I sat at parent-teacher conferences bragging about gifts passed in secret. I didn't post them myself. I didn't need to. They had already found their way into a neighborhood Facebook group where sympathy turned into outrage. Strangers wrote comments sharper than anything I could have crafted. Imagine doing this to your own kid's mother. This isn't just cheating, it's cruelty. By the end of that week, his name had slipped into corners of social media I had never touched. Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok clips of my words, paired with screenshots, strangers shaking their heads at the thought of what he had thrown away. A hashtag attached to his name began trending locally. Coward Adam. It spread like wildfire. I never lifted a finger to push it, but the momentum was unstoppable. The sound of strangers lip-syncing the words I had spoken. He auditioned for the role of coward, and he nailed it. Was surreal. Adam hated nothing more than mockery. Now it was the currency of his name. He tried once more to reclaim the stage. One night, he went live on Instagram, sitting in his car, his voice pitched low with practiced sorrow. He said, "We all make mistakes. I've asked for forgiveness. I just need privacy." His eyes kept flicking down to the comments, hoping for sympathy. But the responses scrolling across the screen were merciless. Mistake is for getting milk. Where's Brooke now? Show receipts. Megan already did. After 12 minutes, his hands shaking as he fumbled to end the stream, the feed cut off. I almost felt the weight of it crush him through the screen. At work, things weren't better. He once thrived on backslaps and lunchtime invitations, but now coworkers looked past him, conversations halting when he walked in. Clients pulled out of meetings muttering about reputation risk. The same mouth he once used to charm investors now had nothing to sell. I heard later that his boss called him in, citing damage to the company's image, and Adam returned home that night pacing, muttering, blaming me. "You're destroying my career," he spat. I looked at him steadily. "No, Adam. You destroyed it the moment you decided secrecy made you invincible." Brooke didn't fare any better. After bolting from that restaurant, she vanished from social media. Mutual friends whispered that she had called them in tears, begging for understanding, but none of them stood by her. Old photos of her and Adam resurfaced, circulating with captions about betrayal. Even people who once indulged her charm cut her off, weary of the scandal. My mother, who had defended her through every misstep growing up, stopped answering her calls altogether. It was a quiet collapse, but one I could feel like a shadow stretching across her life. She was reaping what she had sown. At home, Adam's mask was gone. He drifted between rooms like a ghost, sometimes seething, sometimes pleading. One night, he stood in the doorway of the guest room where he slept, now his face pale. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me fall apart?" I turned from folding laundry and looked at him without a flicker. "I don't have to enjoy it," I said. "I just have to let it happen." He muttered about how cruel I had become, but his words barely landed. He had mistaken silence for protection for so long that he couldn't see what it meant when I stopped protecting him. The irony was that I never needed to orchestrate his downfall. I hadn't planted stories or begged for sympathy. All I had done was refuse to cover for him anymore. The voice memo, the texts, the screenshots, they carried themselves. Each denial he attempted only pulled out another thread. Friends of Brooke's people I didn't even know began sharing stories of her bragging about Adam long before the anniversary. Even his brother posted online, "Some lines in family can't be uncrossed." It didn't name names, but everyone understood. The circle had closed in. He was the common thread, and it was choking him. At the end of that month, when Adam lost his job officially, he came home with a face that had lost its arrogance. He slammed the termination letter on the counter, his voice breaking between fury and despair. "This is your fault," he said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "No, Adam," I told him quietly. "This is the cost of what you chose, and you're the one paying it." He staggered back as though I had struck him, muttering curses under his breath. I simply gathered Ella's school papers from the table and walked past him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a fight. For years, Adam had believed that consequences belonged to other people, that charm could cover lies and secrecy could erase truth. But now, he lived in the wreckage of his own choices, and the more he tried to crawl out, the deeper he sank. I had stopped shielding him, and the world had picked up where I left off. The day of our first court hearing came quicker than I expected, but I was ready. I had spent weeks preparing with Helen, gathering every document, every message, every proof of sacrifice that had carried our family while Adam gambled it away. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and coffee, the echo of shoes on the tile, reminding me this was no longer a private war. It was official. Adam arrived late, his tie crooked, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept. The man who once strutted through boardrooms now looked like someone waiting for sentencing. Helen was calm beside me, her dark blazer crisp, her hands steady as she organized our files. "Remember," she whispered, "we don't have to prove feelings. We prove facts, and you have more than enough." Her words steadied me as the judge entered, a stern man with silver hair, who looked unimpressed before anyone spoke. When Adam tried to begin with excuses, saying it was emotional support with Brooke, Helen didn't even flinch. She slid the transcript of the voice memo forward. The judge read the line aloud. Adam's own words praising my sister in detail, and a chuckle rippled through the courtroom. Adam's face turned scarlet, his shoulders sagging. It was the first time I saw him understand that charm had no value here. Custody was the next battle, and it mattered more to me than any account or property. I laid out Ella's school records, medical appointments, and the calendar of every parent-teacher conference I had attended. Helen presented them neatly, her voice steady, showing how I had managed the entirety of our daughter's life. Then came the list of Adam's absences, missed pickups, forgotten recitals the night he left her waiting in the cold while a meeting ran late. By the end, the judge's tone shifted from neutral to firm. Full custody awarded to the mother. Supervised visitation for the father. The words sank into the room like a stone in water. Adam hissed under his breath as we walked out, his voice sharp with venom. "You turned her against me." I stopped, looked him squarely in the eye, and said, "No. You did that the moment you made her hide your lies." The financial division followed with brutal swiftness. Helen traced the down payment on our home directly to my inheritance, every dollar recorded. She outlined my contributions to savings, retirement, even the business venture Adam abandoned, without ever paying me back. Piece by piece, his leverage slipped through his fingers until there was nothing left but debts. When the gavel struck, the house was mine, the majority of the accounts mine, the retirement split, but weighted in my favor. Adam stared at the papers as though they were written in another language, his mouth opening but no words forming. His safety net had always been his father, but even that thread snapped. Mr. Whitman pulled me aside afterward, his voice thick with shame. "He's no longer my concern. You and Ella, you'll always have my support." I thanked him quietly, but inside I felt the ground shift. Even his own blood had turned away. Brooke's absence was almost as loud as Adam's unraveling. She didn't show her face in court. Friends told me she had left Denver, bouncing between couches in another city looking for sympathy and finding none. Once that knowledge might have given me grim satisfaction, but now it was background noise. She had destroyed herself. I didn't need to lift a hand. The betrayal she carried was punishment enough. My focus stayed on Ella, on ensuring that her life was shielded from the chaos Adam and Brooke had created. The weeks that followed stripped Adam of the last fragments of his old life. His company cited damage to public trust and terminated him formally. His car was repossessed, his credit sank, and he moved from friend to friend, no stability left. I saw him once outside the courthouse again, his suit hanging loose on his frame, his hair unkempt. He sneered faintly, trying to summon the arrogance he once wore like a second skin. But when I said quietly, "You built this mess. I just stopped cleaning it up for you," he faltered. The words struck harder than any slap could. He muttered to himself and staggered off, a man without a destination. At home, the contrast was sharp. My parents came for dinner, bringing homemade soup and stories from when I was little. Ella laughed more freely, her shoulders lighter, no longer tiptoeing around the moods of a distracted father. The house felt alive again, not a stage for performance, but a place of peace. The silence at night was no longer heavy. It was calm. I rebuilt room by room, repainting walls, shifting furniture, planting flowers in the yard. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, proof that the house I had built with my inheritance was truly mine now. Adam's mother, who had once begged for healing, finally admitted over the phone, "He's not the man I thought he was. Until he takes responsibility, he isn't welcome in my home." Even she, who had excused him for so long, saw the truth. Holidays came and went, and for the first time, Adam was absent. We shared meals, laughter, and healing without him. His seat at the table stayed empty, and no one missed it. The final court decree came in black ink on white paper, neat and official. Divorce finalized. Custody granted. Assets divided. Everything I had fought for secured. When the judge stamped the documents, I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I simply breathed a long exhale that carried years of sacrifice with it. Adam walked out that day with nothing but debts and the clothes on his back. The man who once thought he was untouchable now lived as proof of what happens when betrayal burns too hot. And I walked out free. But freedom doesn't mean the echoes stop. Late one evening, weeks later, a knock rattled the door. Slow, heavy, insistent. I opened it to find Adam standing there, thinner, unshaven, desperation written across his face. "Megan," he said, my name cracked in his throat. "Please, I need to talk to you." His suit jacket was wrinkled, the same one he had worn in court, now hanging loosely on his shoulders. I stood in the doorway without moving aside. "You shouldn't be here." He nodded, rubbing his temples. "I know, but I've lost everything. My job, my family. Brooke's gone, my parents won't take my calls. I'm sleeping on a couch. I can't even buy dinner most nights." His voice broke, and for a moment he looked less like the man I married, and more like a stranger hollowed out by his own choices. I studied him carefully, weighing every word he spoke. "You meant every second of it, Adam," I said finally. "Every lie, every sneer, every betrayal. Don't stand here pretending it was an accident." He flinched, his eyes darting like a man searching for an escape that wasn't there. "I was stupid weak, but we had 10 years, Claire. Doesn't that count for something?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I want my family back. I want Ella to know I'm not the monster people say I am. Please, can't we start over?" Something in me shifted, but not toward him. Toward the truth. Toward the vow I had made that night I walked out of our anniversary dinner, that I would never let him humiliate me again. "Start over," I repeated, my tone sharp. "You don't get to press reset after shattering everything. You chose betrayal. You chose cowardice. Now you live in the ruins." His hands trembled. "Claire, please, I'll change. I swear." I let the silence stretch, pressing into him like a weight he couldn't bear. Then I gave him the words he needed to hear, whether they broke him or not. "You are the architect of your own destruction." His shoulders caved, his lips parted, his eyes glassy. For once, he had no comeback. I stepped back and closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place like a final nail sealing his fate. On the other side, I heard a sound halfway between a sob and a curse, then his footsteps retreating into the night. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt nothing but clarity. The chapter was closed. Months after closing the door on Adam, life began to settle into something that resembled peace. I no longer woke each morning bracing for the sound of raised voices or the weight of a lie waiting to be discovered. Instead, I woke to sunlight spilling across the curtains and the faint patter of Ella's feet on the hardwood floor. The house carried a new stillness, not heavy with secrets, but calm in a way I hadn't felt for years. It was mine again, every wall and corner reclaimed. I could breathe inside it. I poured my energy into work, stepping back into a career I had once shelved to hold everything else together. Helen often said that betrayal sharpens people, and she was right. My focus at the office was keener, my decisions bolder, and promotions followed one after another. For the first time, the sacrifices I had once made for Adam's failed ventures no longer weighed me down. I wasn't just managing projects, I was leading them. A colleague once called me relentless, and instead of shrinking from it, I accepted it as truth. I had learned the cost of being too soft. At home, Ella thrived. Without the tension of Adam's unpredictable moods, she bloomed. She asked to join soccer, and I stood on the sidelines every Saturday clapping until my palms stung. She asked if she could try piano, and I found her a teacher who came once a week, filling the house with music instead of silence. One night, as I tucked her in, she whispered, "Mommy, you're my hero." The words broke something inside me in the best way, sealing the truth that every fight, every sleepless night had been worth it. She wasn't learning endurance through silence. She was learning strength through example. Adam, meanwhile, became little more than a shadow in whispers I overheard from others. Friends mentioned spotting him downtown, thinner, his once polished suits replaced with worn jackets. I heard he begged old colleagues for introductions, but no one was willing to risk their reputation. He had burned too many bridges. Even Brooke had long since disappeared from Denver, her name spoken only when someone wanted to make a point about betrayal. Their collapse had been spectacular, but it no longer needed my attention. They were simply the background noise to a life I was rebuilding without them. One afternoon at the grocery store, I turned a corner and nearly walked straight into Adam. His cart was nearly empty cans of soup, a loaf of bread, nothing more. He froze when he saw me, his eyes darting to the floor like a guilty child. He looked smaller somehow, his frame hunched, his presence dimmed. I kept walking my own cart rolling past him, and I didn't offer a word. I didn't need to. The look on his face told me he knew exactly what he had lost. I didn't feel rage anymore, just distance, as though he had become a storm I once survived, now long gone beyond the horizon. My parents grew more protective as the months passed. My mother, who had always tried to see both sides, now called Adam that man, and nothing more. My father, who had spent years swallowing his opinions for the sake of family peace, finally said aloud what I think he had always known. He never deserved you, Claire. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I felt my family's support not as a fragile balance, but as a steady anchor. I began making changes to the house, not out of necessity, but as a declaration. I repainted the kitchen, tearing down the color Adam had once insisted on. I bought new furniture, lighter and brighter filling rooms that had once felt heavy with memories. Every change was like pulling a thread of him out of the walls, leaving only what I chose to keep. Ella helped paint her own room, choosing a soft yellow that made her smile each morning. She said it felt like sunshine, and I agreed. That house was no longer the stage for Adam's deception. It was our home again. I heard once through a mutual acquaintance that Adam had tried reaching out to his parents, begging for a second chance. His father refused to answer. His mother sent him a single message: "Until you take responsibility, don't come back." They had finally drawn their line. He was cut off from the very safety nets that had enabled him for so long. Without family, without career, without reputation, Adam drifted. People didn't whisper his name with pity anymore. They shook their heads with disgust, a cautionary tale about arrogance and betrayal. As for Brooke, she faded even further. Someone mentioned she was living in another state, working odd jobs, staying off the radar. I didn't seek her out, didn't read the details. She was no longer a part of my story. Her betrayal had cut deep, but the wound had scarred over. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. The contrast was stark. While she wandered from place to place, I was building stability brick by brick. By the end of the year, I realized I no longer lived in survival mode. I no longer measured each day by what chaos might arrive. The silence of the house had shifted into peace. The mornings were light, the evenings steady. I found myself laughing more easily, not just at Ella's antics, but at my own freedom. I had shed the weight of carrying someone else's lies. What was left was mine alone. But peace doesn't mean forgetting. Adam remained a shadow, a reminder of what betrayal looks like when it finally collapses. I carried that knowledge with me, not as fear, but as armor. I knew the signs, now knew the cost of silence, and I would never mistake them again. The life I had built wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was mine. And that, more than anything, was justice. In the months that followed, I found myself standing in a life that finally felt like mine. The noise of Adam's downfall. Brooke's disappearance and the whispers of our extended families had quieted into background hums I no longer cared to tune into. What remained was the steady rhythm of Ella's laughter, the familiar weight of my house settling at night, and the unexpected comfort of mornings that began with peace instead of dread. It was not the life I once imagined, but it was far better than the life I left behind. Justice, I learned, does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the way people look at you with respect instead of pity, or in the way your child rests easy because she no longer has to live in the shadows of lies. Adam had thought exposure would break me, but in the end, it broke him. Every credit card declined, every job offer withdrawn, every friend who turned their back. Those were not my weapons. They were his own choices catching up to him. And Brooke, who once smirked across the table at me as though she had taken something I could never reclaim, now lived in exile of her own making. They had written their fates long before I stopped covering for them. What surprised me most was how little I needed revenge once dignity returned. The first months, I thought I wanted to see Adam crawl to hear Brooke beg. But by the time it happened, it no longer mattered. Their apologies, even if they had come, would not have been enough. What mattered was Ella's steady growth, my parents' support, and my own ability to wake each day without dread. Strength, I realized, was never about winning against someone else. It was about refusing to lose yourself, no matter what they take from you. One evening, I sat on the porch while Ella worked on a school project inside. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in colors I hadn't noticed in years. I thought about that night of our anniversary, about the voice memo that shattered everything I believed to be solid. Back then, it felt like the end of the world. But now, sitting there with a soft breeze against my face, I understood it had been the beginning. Sometimes, endings are gifts in disguise, painful but necessary, forcing us to stop living small in someone else's shadow. My parents visit often now, carrying groceries, helping with Ella's soccer games, filling our weekends with a kind of joy I never thought I'd have again. They've become my circle, my reminder that family, even with its fractures, can mend in the right places. Ella no longer asks about her father in the same way she used to. She has learned to measure love by presence, not empty promises. She knows who shows up, and that is enough for her. Adam still lingers somewhere beyond our walls, I'm sure. Perhaps he wakes every morning with regret. Perhaps he does not. Either way, his choices are no longer my burden to carry. I gave enough years to covering his mistakes, to absorbing his betrayals. Now my only responsibility is to myself and to the little girl who looks at me as her model for strength. That is a vow I will never break. If there's anything this journey has taught me, it is this: dignity is not given, it is reclaimed. Betrayal may steal your trust, but it cannot steal your worth unless you hand it over. And sometimes, the sharpest form of revenge is not shouting or striking back. It is living well with your head high, while those who wronged you fade into the wreckage they built themselves. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke to you most deeply. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories like this bring you comfort or clarity, I invite you to stay connected here.